Columbus, Christmas week. The arrivals board said 2:19 p.m. My watch agreed. I stepped off the plane with a winter coat that still smelled like road salt and a key ring in my pocket. I hadn't taken off my person in 30 years, the keys to my safe deposit box at Maple Grove Savings. People hugged. I waited. 2:27 p.m. Text from Lily. Dad, wait by door 6. We're on our way. Don't grab a taxi, it's a mess out there. No emoji. No, can't wait to see you. Just logistics. I told myself that was fine, kids have kids. Holidays are chaos. I parked myself by door 6 with my carry-on and the smaller duffel that held what mattered. A leather folder with my updated will, a list of beneficiaries, and a few cashier's checks earmarked the old-fashioned way. I'd written notes on each envelope because I still believe love should come with handwriting. 2:58 p.m. Me, all good. I'll be here. 3:21 p.m. Lily, be patient. Traffic is toxic today. Toxic. The word pinged against my ribs. Not sorry. Not we're excited. Just a little linguistic smoke meant to fog the room. Gaslighting wears a nice coat at the holidays. At 3:45 I called. Straight to voicemail. I scrolled through my notes app, the checklist I made before the flight. Call the bank joint accounts. Confirm POD designations. Print copies, written evidence in trip folder. That's who I am. I like paper. Paper remembers when people lie. 4:06 p.m. Lily. Don't call, I'm driving. 15 minutes, tops. 15 minutes is how narcissists tell time. Always close enough to keep you still. I watched a boy run into his grandfather's arms and heard 2 women planning a casserole schedule. It's strange how other people's joy sounds louder when you're being benched. By 4:40 I'd clocked 5 unanswered calls and 2 identical texts. Be patient. I texted Ethan, my son-in-law. 4:41 p.m. Me. At door 6. All okay? 4:52 p.m. Ethan. Meetings. On my way to get Lily. Don't spend on taxis. Waste of money. That line, waste of money, landed heavier than it should have. My money has been useful enough, bank accounts opened for emergencies that were always theirs. Never mine. Somewhere along the line, I'd become an enabler with a father's heart. I didn't set boundaries. I wrote checks. 5:30 turned into 6:05 and then 6:37. I logged each call like entries in a ledger. 9 dials, 3 replies, 0 warmth. The concourse still smelled like cinnamon pretzels. I wasn't hungry. 6:44 p.m. Me, I can Uber if you're tied up. 6:46 p.m. Lily, please don't, we're figuring parking. Stay by door 6. Parking? Sure. I palmed the key ring in my coat pocket, the safe deposit key cool against my thumb, and wondered why it suddenly felt like a trigger rather than a comfort. I'd planned to add Lily as contingent on a couple of small accounts after the new year. In my leather folder, her name waited in neat block letters. I thought about a pen scratching through them. Just a line. The smallest movement can redraw a life. 7:12 p.m. I called again. Voicemail. I sent another text. 7:13 p.m. Me. Are you safe? 7:25 p.m. Lily. Yes. Be patient. I don't mind patience. I mind choreography. I mind being told not to use my own legs, my own money, my own judgment. That's how control works, toxic in small, polite doses until you're the last one to notice you've stopped moving. 8:03 p.m. I bought coffee I didn't want and stared at the arrivals board like it might list my daughter. Families thinned out. The floor crew dragged a yellow sign across a spill, and I wondered when exactly I'd slipped from guest to afterthought. I replayed her wording. Don't grab a taxi. Why? If they were drowning in Christmas traffic, a cab would be a life raft. Unless the goal was to keep me docked. 8:41 p.m. Me call Hajan 2. Voicemail. 8:44 p.m. Me, text. If I don't hear from you in 15, I'm finding my own way. No answer. I took out the leather folder, checked the tabs, will, accounts, trust draft. My handwriting looked steady. Mine still is. I slipped it back and zipped the duffel. When a person tells you they'll be there soon 3 times and tells you not to act for yourself twice, that's not traffic, that's management. 8:59 p.m. I tightened my glove, felt the safe deposit key dig into the base of my palm, and finally ordered a car. If that counted as a line in the sand, so be it. Boundaries can start with 4 words. I'll handle it myself. By the time the Uber's tires left the airport curb, Ohio's sky had turned the color of old steel. Snow came down in thin, nervous lines like the world couldn't decide whether to freeze or just give up. The driver kept the heater high, and I sat in the back watching families unload gifts at drop-off lanes, laughing as if the cold couldn't touch them. It's funny how warmth isn't always about temperature. I tried not to check my phone again, but self-respect can be weak when you're being ignored by someone you love. 14 missed calls. 2 identical texts. Be patient. That phrase echoed like a screensaver motion without meaning. I told myself stories to fill the silence. Maybe the interstate was jammed. Maybe Emma, my granddaughter, had come down with the flu. Maybe Lily and Ethan had fought about who'd pick me up. Excuses are easy when you're trained to give people the benefit of the doubt. That's the thing about being an enabler, you can build entire fairy tales out of other people's negligence. Halfway down I-70, the driver glanced at me through the mirror. "You sure someone's meeting you, sir?" "Eventually," I said. And even I didn't believe it. My phone buzzed at 9:12 p.m. "Lily, sorry, Dad. Long day. Don't spend money on a taxi, okay? We'll cover it tomorrow." I stared at the message. Don't spend money. There it was again, the gentle control language of someone who treats your independence like a malfunction. Gaslighting doesn't always come wrapped in shouting. Sometimes it's a smiley reminder to sit still. I typed back, "Too late. Already on my way," then deleted it. I didn't want to sound petty. Old habits die hard. Snow thickened. Headlights smeared across the windshield, white and yellow threads in a storm tapestry. The driver turned up the radio holiday music, of course. Every lyric about coming home felt like a punchline aimed straight at me. At 9:45, my phone vibrated again. "Lily. Dad. Seriously. Where are you?" "Me. On Route 315. Almost there. You didn't answer for hours." "Lily, you're overreacting. We had a million things going on." That line, "you're overreacting," landed sharp. Classic toxic deflection. Make the other person feel crazy for noticing the obvious. I could almost hear her tone. Clipped. Superior. Bored. She'd picked that up from Ethan, the self-proclaimed financial genius who loved to advise me on my own accounts. Like the man who built a hardware business from nothing couldn't add. The car exited toward Maple Grove. Streetlights reflected off perfect lawns and over-decorated porches. Every house looked like a Christmas card that forgot real people lived inside. I checked my phone again. Nothing. 9:58 p.m. I scrolled through my notes app, the one labeled Estate Planning 2025. Under To Finalize After Holidays, I'd written, "Add Lily as joint on one CD account, verify her signature at bank." I stared at it for a full minute before typing a new line under it. Reconsider. My throat tightened. I wasn't angry yet, just hollow. The kind of hollow that hums. I realized how many years I'd treated love as a payment plan. Tuition, rent, car repairs, each one disguised as affection. Every "thanks, Dad." A down payment on silence later. The driver slowed as we reached Maple Grove Estates. Snow piled on mailboxes like frosted hats. Christmas lights blinked rhythmically, taunting in red and green. I spotted their house from a block away, warm windows, shadows moving inside. They were home. They'd been home the whole time. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. I almost told the driver to keep going to circle the block until I figured out what kind of man waits 8 hours to be forgotten. But the words stuck. I was still holding on to the last thread of, maybe. "Here we are," the driver said gently, pulling into the drive. "Yeah," I murmured. "Here we are." I sat there a moment, watching the house through the glass. Music drifted faintly, something jazzy, not a care in the world. My phone buzzed again. "Lily, don't ring the bell if you get there first. We're almost back." The lock's sticky. "Almost back. From where?" I looked at the driveway, 2 cars, both parked, no snow disturbed around the tires. Lies don't even bother dressing up in coats when people think you won't call them out. I texted one word. "Okay." But inside, something cracked, not loud, not violent. Just a quiet fracture of trust that would never heal straight. I realized this was more than bad communication. It was pattern. The kind of slow, emotional corrosion that turns affection into leverage. I stepped out of the car. The wind hit like pins. My boots crunched on snow that should have been a welcome mat. I tightened my coat and whispered to myself, "They're teaching you how they value you, Dan. Believe them." And not is a teleobjective. Somewhere inside, laughter burst again, hers, his, maybe both. I stood under the porch light, invisible in plain sight, and thought, if love needs me to shrink to fit inside it, it's not love, it's management. I didn't knock. Not yet. Not until I decided what version of myself was walking through that door. The snow had softened into a steady whisper by the time the car pulled away. I stood there in the driveway, suitcase handle in one hand, the other still gripping my phone like it might deliver an apology if I squeezed hard enough. It didn't. The house glowed like a catalog photo, white lights trimmed every window. Golden warmth spilling through curtains just open enough to tease. Inside, silhouettes moved slow, easy, like people who knew they were loved and expected. It took my eyes a second to adjust, but then I saw her. Lily, holding a wine glass, laughing head tilted the same way her mother used to when something genuinely delighted her. I could hear the faint hum of music, see movement near the dining table. 4 plates. 4. None waiting, so I waited. Again, I stood under the porch light pretending to check messages, hoping maybe she'd come out, maybe this was a mix-up, some twisted version of, "Surprise, Dad." I even half smiled, just in case she looked through the window. But no one did. The kind of laughter that lives behind glass doesn't hear the people freezing on the other side. 10:11 p.m. text from Lily. "We're still on the way. Be patient. Almost there. Almost there." The phrase had lost all meaning, like an overdrafted account that still looked full on paper. I lifted my eyes again, Ethan's shape now, leaning close to Lily, whispering something that made her cover her mouth and laugh harder. He looked comfortable. Home. The driver's taillights disappeared down the road, leaving me alone in a postcard that didn't include my name. My breath fogged up the air. For the first time, I wondered if they'd truly expected me to stand out here all night, or if the cruelty had just grown that casual. I pulled my suitcase to the edge of the porch, brushed snow from the railing, and sat. The cold wood bit through my jeans. Across the street, a family was building a snowman under their porch light, Dad shaping the base, Mom helping a kid with the scarf. I watched longer than I should have. Not because I envied them, but because I needed proof that normal still existed somewhere nearby. When I looked back at Lily's house, the laughter had changed. It was sharper now, the kind that follows inside jokes. They were comfortable enough to forget me entirely. I thought about the Christmas Eves years ago when she'd wake me at dawn just to see what Santa left. How she'd squeal at the smallest gifts. I'd saved every note she'd ever written me, "You're the best dad ever," in crayon, shaky letters. I almost laughed at how those words could expire without warning. At 10:27, I called again, straight to voicemail. Her greeting was chirpy, automated, soulless. I left a message anyway. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm at the house now. Hope everything's okay. I'm right outside." No callback. Just the faint sound of more laughter. I looked down at my boots, snow caked thick, melting against the porch floor. My suitcase leaned beside me, a sad monument to good intentions. Inside it, presents wrapped in silver paper, a few old photos, and a folder with bank papers that suddenly felt ridiculous. I'd spent weeks revising my will, thinking I was building security for the very people pretending I didn't exist. The wind picked up. Through the window, I could see Ethan pouring wine for Richard and Marianne, his parents. They clinked glasses, so this was the plan. An intimate dinner without the man who made it financially possible. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the efficiency, the organization of betrayal. They'd prepped food, set the table, and coordinated their lies with the same energy I once used to build a business from scratch. I checked my phone again. No messages. My last call now showed 15 attempts. Numbers had become the only proof I existed. Somewhere deep down, the businessman in me started cataloging evidence. Timestamps, texts, voicemails. Part of me knew this wasn't just a bad night. It was documentation of toxic behavior I'd ignored for years. When someone shows you their boundaries exclude you, that's data, not drama. I stood up, brushed the snow off my coat, and took a few steps toward the window. Closer now, I could see the details: china plates, the roast in the center of the table, candlelight dancing across faces that looked too content. I caught sight of Lily again. Mid-laugh. The same face that used to light up when I'd walk through her school gates. The urge to knock was strong, almost physical. But my hand stayed frozen. If I knocked, I'd be begging. If I waited, I'd be confirming their control. Both were losses, so I stepped back into the cold, the crunch of snow under my boots breaking the silence I'd been trapped in for hours. Somewhere behind me, the house pulsed with life. Ahead, the road was empty but honest. I whispered it to the night, maybe to myself. They built warmth by leaving me in the cold. But warmth earned that way doesn't last. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel the need to text "be patient." I'd finally stopped waiting. When I finally walked up to the door, my fingers were so cold they barely felt the brass handle. I didn't knock right away. I just stood there, staring at the wreath perfectly symmetrical, gold ribbon tied with the precision of someone who never does their own dirty work. I heard laughter again, closer this time. Something in me refused to leave without facing whatever this was. So I rang the bell. Once, twice. On the third ring, footsteps. The door cracked open, and there she was. Lily, her face flushed from wine, her smile evaporating the second she saw me. "Dad?" she blurted, voice pitched too high. "You're here. Oh my God." I thought, what are you doing outside?" "I could ask you the same," I said, brushing snow from my coat. "Been out here a while." "Oh, we had a flat tire on the way to get you," she said too fast. "It's been a crazy night." "Right," I answered quietly, stepping inside. "Flat tire. Must have fixed itself, huh?" I nodded toward the two cars sitting perfectly in the driveway through the window. Her eyes flickered there and back, searching for an escape hatch. Ethan appeared behind her, red-faced and tight-lipped. "Hey, Dan. We were literally just celebrating without me." I cut him off. The words surprised even me, sharp and solid. He started to say something, but Lily jumped in, talking over him, her tone syrupy. "Dad, don't be dramatic. We were just about to call you. After dinner or after dessert?" She flinched. For a second, the room fell completely silent. The scent of roasted garlic hung heavy in the air, and I saw the dining table behind them. Plates scraped clean, wine glasses half full, candles dying out. "Why don't you sit down, Dad?" Ethan said, his voice patronizingly calm, like I was a confused client, not the man who paid off their first mortgage. I didn't move. "No, thanks. I just want the truth." Lily sighed, performing exhaustion. "You're overreacting again. We told you traffic was insane. You could have just waited." "I did. 8 hours," I said. 35 calls, 14 texts. You answered 3 with lies." Her jaw clenched. "You're twisting things." There it was, the gaslighting I'd trained myself to tolerate. A few years ago, I would have apologized, just to end the tension. But something in me had finally snapped into focus. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. "I used to think your silence meant you were busy. Now I realize it was just convenient." Behind her, the laughter from the dining room started again, muffled through the wall. Richard and Marianne, Ethan's parents, probably wondering what the commotion was. Lily turned her head and whispered, "Keep your voice down, please. This isn't the time." "When is the time exactly?" I asked. "After the will clears? After I'm gone?" "Dad," she hissed. "That's not fair." "No, it's not, but it's accurate." The way her face froze told me I'd hit something raw. She stammered, "I think you should rest. We can talk tomorrow when you've cooled off." "Tomorrow," I repeated. "That's convenient too." It was new the dire way. Ethan stepped forward, his tone managerial. "Look, Dan, let's not make a scene. You're tired, and we've had a long day." He didn't even realize he'd said scene, like this was theater. Maybe for them, it always had been. I took a deep breath and looked around the living room, tasteful, cold, sterile. Every piece of furniture expensive, but soulless. I remembered helping them pick this house, signing the check for the down payment like it was an act of love. Back then, I thought family and money could coexist if you just gave enough. Tonight proved me wrong. They exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that only happens between co-conspirators. And then it hit me. There was no accident, no misunderstanding. This was strategy. I wasn't supposed to be here at all. I walked past them toward the hallway. I needed a second to breathe, to think. Voices followed me from the kitchen, quiet at first, then clearer as I got closer to the half-open door. Ethan's voice. "I told you he'd show up eventually. The man can't take a hint." Lily's laugh soft, scornful. "I just didn't want him embarrassing us again in front of your parents. The stories, the small talk, it's exhausting." "You did the right thing," Ethan said. Once the inheritance settles, we won't have to fake any of this. Silence. Just the clink of plates. Then Lily again. Lower. Colder. Honestly, I wish he'd just stop trying so hard. It's pathetic. That word did it. Pathetic. The kind of word you don't come back from. I backed away from the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. I'd suspected cruelty. I hadn't expected contempt. Every gift, every dollar, every second chance, they weren't acts of love anymore. They were receipts in a ledger she'd already decided to close. I stood in that hallway, surrounded by family photos smiling down at me, realizing every frame was now a lie. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, because clarity, even when it hurts, is still freedom. I straightened my shoulders and whispered to myself, enough. No more enabling. No more waiting for love that doesn't live here anymore. I don't remember deciding to walk back into that dining room. My body just moved, like instinct had taken over after years of swallowing silence. Lily and Ethan were still by the kitchen counter when I stepped in, their voices slicing through the air like dull knives that had been used too many times to hurt efficiently. The laughter from the other room died the second they saw my face. "Dad," Lily started, voice trembling but still trying to sound in control. I heard everything," I said. Every single word. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan straightened his tie like this was some kind of business meeting gone awkward. "Dan," he began, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I cut in, calm but shaking inside. "You said I embarrass you. That my stories are pathetic. You said you hoped I wouldn't show up tonight. Dad, you weren't supposed to." "To what? Find out what my daughter really thinks of me?" I asked. "You've spent years treating my generosity like an obligation. You've taken and taken, until even your excuses sound rehearsed." "Stop twisting things," Lily snapped, her voice sharp enough to break glass. "You make everything about money. We just wanted a peaceful Christmas." "Peaceful for who?" I said. "For you? The people who lied about a flat tire while sitting in a warm house eating dinner?" Richard and Marianne appeared in the doorway, both wide-eyed, the weight of the scene settling over them like a storm cloud. "What's going on here?" Richard asked, his voice slow and deliberate, the voice of a man used to judging others, not family drama. Lily turned to them, desperate. "Dad's upset because there was a mix-up with his flight. We were just explaining." I laughed, short and humorless. "My flight was on time. I landed 8 hours ago. 35 calls, 3 texts. You ignored every one." Marianne's hand went to her mouth. Richard frowned. "That can't be right. You told us he wasn't arriving until tomorrow morning." The air froze. Lily's color drained so fast it was like watching ink fade in water. Ethan looked at her, then at his parents, realizing the narrative was slipping beyond repair. "Dad," Lily said, her voice cracking. "I just got confused, that's all. We were overwhelmed. It's Christmas. You know how stressful it gets." "No," I said quietly. "This wasn't confusion. This was convenience." Ethan tried to step in, voice smooth and measured, but the slick salesman tone had nowhere left to hide. "Let's not escalate. It's late. Everyone's tired." "Escalate?" I repeated. "You think this is about temper? It's about truth. You two have been treating me like a bank account with legs. I paid your tuition, your down payment, your emergencies, and when I needed nothing more than a ride, you vanished." Marianne whispered. "Lily." In disbelief, Lily's eyes glistened, but the tears weren't guilt. They were frustration at being caught. "You don't understand," she said. "You make us feel guilty every time you bring up money. We can never just enjoy things without you reminding us what you've done." "Then, that's the difference between guilt and accountability," I said. "Guilt is something you feel. Accountability is something you owe." For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the clock on the wall marking each second like a hammer. Richard cleared his throat. "Roger, why don't we all take a breath? Sit down. Talk this out calmly." "Talk it out?" I shook my head. "There's nothing left to talk about." I turned to Lily. "You lied to the people who welcomed me into their home. You lied to me. You mocked my life's work, the business that built everything you have." She took a step toward me. "You're twisting it again," she said, her voice trembling. "We were just venting. Everyone talks about family. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything," I said. especially when it's spoken behind a closed door. Her face twisted, half anger, half shame. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. For the first time, I saw the cracks forming between them, small. But there, Richard spoke quietly. "Lily, is what he's saying true?" She hesitated too long. That silence was enough. Marianne's expression shifted from pity to disappointment. "I can't believe you'd treat your father this way," she said. "Not on Christmas." Lily wiped her face, turned to me again, desperate now. "Dad, we can fix this. I didn't mean any of it. I just—" "Stop," I said. "You meant every word. Or you wouldn't have said it." I looked around the room, the candles melting into pools, the half-finished wine, the smell of roast fading into something stale. "You built a perfect Christmas, Lily," I said softly. "You just forgot to invite the man who paid for it." Ethan tried to salvage the situation. "We can still have dessert together. Make things right." I almost laughed. "You can't sweeten betrayal with pie." The room went silent again. Lily opened her mouth but said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence had already confessed everything. I took a slow breath and turned toward the door. "You'll get an email from me soon," I said, my voice steady now, "about the accounts, the house, and the will. Consider this the last time you'll ever use the word inheritance, like a promise." Lily's face fell. "Dad, please don't do that. We can fix this." Fill into doing as whited in carrot and Reekley. "No," I said. "You can't. But I can." As I stepped out into the night, the cold hit me hard, clean, and honest. Behind me, the warmth of their perfect house flickered through the window. But it didn't feel like warmth anymore. It felt like confinement. I walked down the driveway, past the cars that never broke down, through the snow that kept falling steady and quiet, like judgment made of light. Inside me, something shifted, not rage, not sadness, just a calm certainty. Boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were fences to protect what was left of you from being stolen again. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly where to draw the line. The highway was nearly empty when I left Maple Grove. Snow slanted across the windshield in diagonal lines, each flake catching the light from passing street lamps before vanishing into blackness. I drove without thinking, no GPS, no music. Just the rhythmic hum of tires on wet asphalt and the echo of words I couldn't unhear. Pathetic. Embarrassing. Inheritance. They looped in my head like static I couldn't shut off. By the time I saw the faded sign for the Maple Inn, I was running on fumes and humiliation. The neon vacancy flickered in and out, like it couldn't make up its mind about me either. Inside, the night clerk, a man with kind eyes and coffee breath, handed me a key with a number tag that had lost half its paint. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. I just wanted a room where no one knew my name or owed me a thank you. The room smelled faintly of bleach and cold air. I set my suitcase by the bed, hung my coat on the single metal hook, and sat down. For a few minutes, I stared at my phone screen lighting up with nothing. No missed calls, no texts, not even a half-hearted apology. You'd think after 35 unanswered calls, I'd stop hoping for one more. But hope has a way of clinging to fools and fathers. I opened my duffel and pulled out the leather folder, the one I'd kept pressed to my chest all day. Inside were copies of my will, the trust drafts, the accounts I'd spent decades building. Each paper was a record of loyalty measured in dollars. I flipped through them slowly, line by line, realizing every signature I'd made was an act of trust in people who saw me as a convenience, not a man. That's when it hit me, not just tonight's cruelty, but the pattern that stretched back years. The time Lily forgot my birthday until she needed help covering her student loan payment. The time Ethan borrowed 20 grand for a business idea that vanished faster than his gratitude. The polite deflections, the guilt trips, the silent treatment when I dared to say no. They'd been writing this script for years, and I'd been reading my lines perfectly. I caught my reflection in the motel mirror, tired eyes, sagging shoulders, a man who looked more like a cautionary tale than a father. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel angry. I felt aware. That's worse in some ways. Anger burns quick. Awareness just sits in your bones and hums. I said it out loud, to the man in the mirror, because saying it made it real. Was I enabling their toxic behavior all this time by being too nice? The question hung there, unanswered but necessary. I studied my reflection, jaw tight, eyes red-rimmed, and almost laughed. I'd spent my entire life teaching Lily to be kind, responsible, independent. Somewhere along the line, she'd learned the opposite lesson, that I'd always fix what she broke, that I'd show up, wait, forgive, repeat. The heater kicked on with a groan, filling the room with uneven warmth. I poured a paper cup of motel coffee that tasted like burned cardboard but felt grounding in my hands. It's time to stop feeling guilty, I whispered, and start fighting back. I opened my laptop, ancient but loyal, and logged into my bank accounts. Years of habit had me checking balances every week, even though I already knew the numbers. This time, I wasn't checking for reassurance. I was checking for control. I scanned through joint accounts, automatic transfers, the trust drafts with Lily's name on them. I hovered over the remove beneficiary option and didn't click it yet, not out of hesitation, out of ceremony. When I did it, I wanted it to mean something. The quiet stretched. I thought about Margaret, my late wife, and what she'd say if she saw me like this. Probably something soft, but firm. You can't fix grown adults by breaking yourself, Dan. She'd been the one with boundaries. I'd always been the fixer, the peacekeeper, the negotiator of emotional debts that never balanced. I reached for my phone again, not to check messages, but to delete one. I opened Lily's contact, the photo of her holding Emma when she was a baby. I stared at it for a long time before hitting remove from favorites. A small click, but the sound felt heavier than any goodbye. A knock startled me. Just the motel clerk, offering extra towels. I thanked him. Before he left, he hesitated. You traveling alone for the holidays? Yeah, I said. Didn't plan it that way. He nodded, kind but not pitying. Sometimes life plans for you. Then he left me to my thoughts. I sat back on the bed, coffee cooling in my hands, thinking about what I needed to do next. I couldn't just drift. Tomorrow had to mean something deliberate. I needed help. Not from family, not from friends too polite to take sides, but from someone who knew how to make things official, binding, and bulletproof. A lawyer. The idea felt strangely comforting, like switching from emotional logic to legal logic, a language I could control. Paper trails don't lie, even when people do. Before I turned in, I took the key ring from my coat pocket, the one with my safe deposit box key, and placed it on the nightstand. It gleamed faintly in the dull light, small but powerful. That key had always represented security for them. Starting now, it represented boundaries for me. I lay back on the bed, the sound of snow tapping the window, and made myself a quiet promise. No more waiting. No more explanations. No more apologizing for doing the right thing. Tomorrow, I'd find someone who could help me rewrite everything from my accounts to my life. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel small. I felt in motion. Morning light crept through the thin motel curtains like it was embarrassed to be there. I hadn't really slept, just drifted between exhaustion and clarity. The air still smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant, but somehow, it felt cleaner than that house in Maple Grove. At least here, the silence wasn't cruel, it was neutral. I sat on the edge of the bed and scrolled through my phone, typing estate lawyers near me. The screen filled with polished headshots and slogans promising peace of mind. The irony wasn't lost on me. I picked one that felt less corporate, more human. Ava Delgado, Estate and Trust Law, Columbus. Her website tagline read, "Protect your legacy before someone else writes it for you." I called. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Harper?" she said, voice steady but warm. "I saw your message come through. You said it was urgent?" "Yeah," I replied, my throat dry. "I need to make some changes. To everything." She didn't ask for details right away. "Can you come in this morning? I have a 10:30 slot open." "I'll be there." Her office was tucked inside an old brick building downtown, the kind that still smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. Her assistant offered coffee that tasted better than anything I'd had in 2 days. And a few minutes later, Ava appeared, late 30s, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes softened by the kind of empathy that doesn't come from a manual. She gestured for me to sit. "So, tell me what's going on, Mr. Harper." For a second, I wasn't sure where to start. There's no legal term for your daughter tried to emotionally erase you on Christmas. So I just laid it out. 12 hours at the airport. The unanswered calls, the lies, the conversation I overheard, the way my daughter treated my life's work like a punchline. I kept my voice steady, but when I finished, I realized my hands were clenched tight on the folder I'd brought. Ava leaned back, silent for a moment, studying me like a puzzle she'd already begun solving. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Here's the good news. You're not powerless. What you're describing isn't just hurtful. It's a pattern of dependency and manipulation. And the only way to stop enabling it is to make it official. Official, I repeated. You mean legal? Exactly, she said. We'll start with the basics. Revise your will, remove direct inheritance access, and establish a trust with conditions. If you want to support your granddaughter, we can set up an educational fund, controlled by a trustee, not by your daughter or son-in-law. I nodded slowly. A trust for Emma, I said. She deserves better than to be collateral in their entitlement. Ava smiled slightly. That's a healthy way to look at it. You're drawing boundaries, not revenge. Boundaries. Think of it as financial therapy. That phrase stuck with me. Financial therapy. I liked the sound of it. She spread some documents across her desk. Let's also talk about your accounts. Any joint ownerships, co-signers, or automatic transfers need to be restructured. You mentioned your daughter's name was on one of your CDs? Yes, I said. She was supposed to be contingent, but I never updated it. I also kept a few cashier's checks in my safe deposit box. Good, Ava said. We'll leave those untouched for now. Keep physical control of them. It's leverage. Not in a manipulative sense, but as protection. Protection from my own family, I said quietly. She met my eyes. Sometimes the hardest boundaries are the ones you set with blood. But paper doesn't lie. Once it's signed, they can't gaslight you out of your own life. That last sentence hit me like a revelation. Paper doesn't lie. I thought about how many times I'd accepted half-truths because they came from people I loved. Maybe I'd been chasing verbal promises in a world that only respected signatures. Ava leaned forward again. Here's what I suggest: a 3-step plan. 1. Formalize your will changes today. 2. Move all major assets into accounts with single ownership under your name only. 3. Establish a restricted trust for your granddaughter. You'll designate me as the trust attorney and trustee of record for now. That ensures no one can tamper with it without your consent. You can do all that? I asked. By end of week, she said simply. I've handled worse family implosions. The key is timing. People like your daughter usually sense when control is slipping and act fast. We act faster. Something about her calm confidence made me feel lighter, as if I'd just been handed back the keys to my own house after years of watching someone else lock the doors. What about them contacting me? I asked. Texts, calls, guilt trips, how do I handle that? Documentation, she said firmly. From now on, all communication should be in writing. Emails only. No phone calls. No emotional debates. If they try to provoke you, that's just evidence. Emotional noise can't hold up in court, but written words can. I laughed softly. So you're saying I should turn my pain into paperwork? And they good, within taking to have placed her? Exactly, she said with a grin. And trust me, it's more satisfying than it sounds. For the first time in days, I actually smiled. Before I left, she gathered a few folders and handed them to me. We'll meet again in 2 days for signatures. In the meantime, I want you to think about something. What's that? Boundaries are acts of love, she said. Not for them, for you. You're teaching yourself how to stop bleeding for people who keep wounding you. I didn't know whether to thank her or just sit in that truth, so I did both. When I stepped back outside, the snow had stopped, the sky a hard, clean blue. I felt the cold bite at my face, but it didn't hurt. It woke me up. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the metal of my safe deposit key, and for once, it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like proof that control was mine again. I looked down the street, sunlight glinting off car roofs, and thought, maybe this is what recovery looks like. Not forgiveness, not revenge, just clarity with structure. Tomorrow, I'd start closing the accounts. By the end of the week, I'd sign the new will. And maybe next Christmas, I'd finally stop waiting for people who never planned to arrive. 2 days later, I was back in Ava's office, same polished wood scent, same calm energy that felt like stepping into sanity after a hurricane. The paperwork was ready. The revised will, the trust for Emma, the statement to remove Lily and Ethan as direct beneficiaries. My name stood alone now on every page. It looked right. Ava sat across from me, reviewing each document with the precision of someone who'd seen too many families self-destruct over money. You sure about this? She asked, her tone gentle but firm. I've never been surer about anything, I said. If I don't do this now, they'll keep treating me like an open wallet with a heartbeat. She nodded. Then let's sign. Each signature felt like closing a wound. My pen moved slowly, deliberate, across line after line. By the time I reached the last page, my hand was shaking not from regret, but from release. When it was done, Ava gathered the papers and smiled. Congratulations, Mr. Harper. You just took back your life. I laughed quietly. Feels more like I just declared emotional bankruptcy. That's not a bad thing, she said. Bankruptcy clears the debt. You're starting fresh. We shook hands, and I left feeling lighter than I had in years. The drive back to the motel felt shorter, like the air had loosened around me. I checked my phone, no new calls. Just one unread message from Lily, time-stamped 3 hours earlier. Lily. Dad, please call me. We need to talk. It's about Mom's jewelry. I ignored it, but curiosity has a way of whispering louder than self-respect. That evening, there was a knock on my motel door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Lily was standing there, hair damp from snow, eyes red, her coat hanging open like she'd run out the door in a hurry. Dad, please, she said. I just need to talk. I didn't invite her in right away. You found me, I said flatly. Impressive. I called Ava's office, she admitted. They wouldn't tell me anything, but I guessed you were still in town. Dad, please, just 5 minutes. Reluctantly, I stepped aside. She walked in, taking in the cheap lamp, the unmade bed, the pile of folders on the nightstand. You're really staying here? She asked softly. Seems fitting, I said. After all, I was left out in the cold once already. She flinched. I deserved that. Then her eyes filled with tears. I was awful. I know I was. I can't sleep since that night, Dad. I keep hearing your voice when you said you waited 13 hours. I can't get it out of my head. Her voice cracked in all the right places, but something about it felt rehearsed. I'd heard this performance before the regret, the trembling sincerity that only lasted until she got what she wanted. Why now? I asked. You had years to say sorry. Because I found out what you did, she said. You changed the will. So that was it. I sat back, calm as still water. You didn't come here for closure, I said. You came for confirmation. No, I came because I panicked, she said quickly. Ethan, he's furious. He said you're trying to punish us. He told me to convince you to change your mind before it's too late. I stared at her. Too late for what? She swallowed. For him to forgive me. For us to make things right. Please, Dad. You're all we have. It was almost laughable. That's not true, I said. You have each other, and your entitlement. It's kept you company this long. Her tears stopped as quickly as they'd started. You think you're the victim, don't you? She snapped. You think changing a few papers erases what you've done? What I've done, I said quietly. I worked, I gave, I waited. You took. That's the entire history of this family written in one sentence. She shook her head. You can't just erase your daughter from your life. I'm not erasing you, I said. I'm redefining the terms of access. That silenced her for a moment. Then she said the thing that confirmed everything Ava had warned me about. Fine. But don't think Emma won't grow up hating you when she finds out what you did. It was a low blow and it didn't land. Emma doesn't need to know anything, I said. Her education trust will be untouched. You, on the other hand, are done treating my legacy like an ATM. Lily's face hardened. You've changed, she whispered. Finally, I said. She turned toward the door, voice shaking with anger now. You'll regret this, Dad. I swear you will. I already did, I said. For 30 years. When she left, I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. The next morning, Ava called. I heard she showed up, she said. I paused. You knew she might? People like her always do, she said. They sense when control is slipping. I sighed. She tried the guilt angle, then the threat. Classic progression, Ava said, almost clinically. You handled it? I think so. Good, she said. Then her tone softened. Can I tell you something personal, Mr. Harper? Of course. She hesitated. The reason I went into estate law, it wasn't for money. My mom went through something similar. My grandparents cut her out of everything after my father died. She never recovered from that betrayal. I wanted to make sure people like her and like you got to decide the ending for themselves. I didn't speak for a while. The second twist of the knife wasn't pain this time, it was perspective. Thank you, I said finally. You're helping me do what my generation never did, put peace in writing. She laughed softly. That's the goal. After we hung up, I opened the curtains. The snow had stopped again, the morning sun glinting off the parking lot like a clean slate. I thought about Lily's face at the door, the mix of fear and fury when she realized she'd lost control. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I'd lost a daughter. I'd just stopped financing one. I sat down at the desk, pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the motel notepad, and wrote, "Boundaries are how love grows back into respect." Then I folded it neatly, slipped it into the folder with my signed will, and smiled. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. A week later, the snow in Columbus had started to melt. The streets were wet, reflecting soft light from street lamps, and everything felt muted, like the city itself was taking a deep breath after a long argument. I'd extended my motel stay twice, not because I couldn't go home, but because I didn't want to. Home wasn't a place anymore, it was a choice, and for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. That morning, I received an email from Ava. The subject line read, "Final confirmation documents recorded and secured." Inside was a short message. "All changes are now official. You have full control of your assets, and the trust for Emma has been independently established." I stared at that line for a long time. You have full control. It was strange how those 4 words could undo decades of guilt. I'd spent my entire life thinking control was selfish, that to be a good father, you had to give without boundaries, forgive without question, and love without asking for anything in return. But control, I realized, wasn't the opposite of love. It was its protection. I took a walk after breakfast, the kind you take when you're trying to feel the weight of your own freedom. The streets were quiet, except for the crunch of slush under my boots. I passed a toy store window where a little girl was pressing her hands to the glass, begging her mom for something she wanted. It made me think of Emma, and for once, the thought didn't hurt. I knew she'd be okay. Her education was safe, her future secured. She'd grow up knowing her grandfather had believed in her, even when her parents didn't deserve that legacy. I went back to the motel, brewed another terrible cup of coffee, and started going through old emails. I deleted hundreds of messages, loan requests, urgent money transfers, guilt-soaked apologies. Every click felt like snipping another thread of obligation that had tied me down for years. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. Lily again. A text this time. Lily. "Dad, we just found out about the trust. You went too far. You've ruined everything." I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but for once, I didn't feel the need to respond. There was nothing left to explain. She would never understand that I hadn't taken something from her. I'd simply stopped giving what she no longer valued. Still, I typed a reply. Me. "Boundaries aren't revenge, Lily. They're recovery. I hope someday you'll understand that." Then I hit send, turned the phone off, and let the silence settle. Later that afternoon, I met Ava one last time to finalize the safe deposit key transfer. When I walked into her office, she smiled like she'd been expecting me. "You look different," she said. "Maybe that's what peace looks like," I replied. She handed me a sealed envelope. "This is your copy of everything: the final will, trust documentation, power of attorney, and bank authorizations. You're untouchable now, legally speaking." I took it, surprised by the lump forming in my throat. "You've done more than legal work, Ava," I said quietly. "You've given me closure I didn't know existed." She smiled again. "You gave that to yourself. I just notarized it." We both laughed. And for the first time in weeks, it didn't sound hollow. When I left her office, the afternoon sun hit the snowmelt just right, turning the sidewalks into ribbons of light. I stood there for a moment, breathing in air that didn't feel heavy anymore. Then I pulled out my phone not to check messages, but to make a booking. A one-way flight to Italy. Florence first, then maybe the Amalfi Coast. A quiet winter, spent surrounded by people who had no idea who I was, who didn't expect anything from me but to show up and live. As I packed my suitcase that night, I came across one last thing: the emerald necklace, the one I'd meant for Lily. I held it in my palm, its green stones catching the dim motel light. It was beautiful, old, and heavier than it looked. 3 generations had worn it: my mother, my wife, and nearly my daughter. Almost. I could have sold it, locked it away, or left it in a drawer as a reminder of everything I'd lost. But instead, I walked to the window, looked out at the moonlit snow, and made a decision. The next morning, I mailed it to Ava's office with a short note. For Emma, when she's old enough to understand that love and money mean nothing without respect. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was just clarity. I dropped the envelope into the postbox, feeling something shift inside me, small, but real. For the first time in years, there was no resentment, no confusion, no guilt, just space. That night, as the plane ticket confirmation email arrived, I poured myself a small glass of whiskey and sat by the window. Snowflakes drifted down again, but now they felt softer, like punctuation marks to the story I'd finally finished writing. I thought about all the hours I'd waited at that airport, the ache of hope that never arrived, and realized something. Maybe the point of all this wasn't to get an apology or a reconciliation. Maybe it was to remember that dignity doesn't demand an audience. The greatest revenge isn't payback, it's peace. Florence in winter looks like forgiveness. The sun sits low, spilling gold on cobblestone streets, and the air smells faintly of espresso and rain-soaked stone. I arrived with one suitcase, a single folder of legal documents, and no expectations. That, it turns out, was enough. It's strange how quickly life can shift once you stop waiting for apologies. Every morning, I walked to the same cafe near the Arno River, ordered a cappuccino, and watched locals argue about soccer like it mattered more than money. There was peace in that simplicity. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, just people showing up honestly in their lives. I'd rented a small flat above a bookstore, the kind of place where the plumbing groans, the windows rattle, and every imperfection feels earned. I filled it with quiet things, books, postcards, and the sound of my own breathing when I woke up. Some nights I'd sit on the balcony with a glass of Chianti and think about the past, not with anger anymore, just understanding. Ava emailed me once a week to update me on the trust fund. Emma's portion was secure, untouched, growing quietly in an account with her name on it. She'd sent a letter to Ava, childish handwriting, all loops and crooked lines. "Thank you for helping my grandpa," it said. "Mom doesn't talk about him much, but I still keep his Christmas card under my pillow." That was enough to break me open and mend me in the same breath. I wrote back, not directly, but through Ava, asking her to tell Emma, "Grandpa's okay. And one day, she'll understand why I had to leave." Not prensen be promise. There's a particular freedom that comes with no longer needing to be understood. For so long, I believed closure meant reconciliation, that people had to meet you in the middle for the pain to stop. But the truth is simpler. Closure happens the moment you stop negotiating with someone who benefits from your confusion. Sometimes, I still dream about that airport. The sound of rolling suitcases, the smell of cinnamon coffee, the echo of laughter that didn't include me. But the version of me sitting there hopeful, waiting, blind to what was happening feels like another lifetime. He was a good man. Just one who hadn't learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. I've started writing again. Not emails or ledgers or apology drafts, just stories. Some about my wife, Margaret, who used to laugh so hard her shoulders shook. Some about Emma, whose curiosity reminded me of her grandmother. And some about myself, not the version I pretended to be for family, but the one that learned, too late, and just in time, how to stay. Yesterday, I received an unexpected message from Ava. She'd attached a photograph her and her mother standing in front of a courthouse. "We won," her email read. "My mother's name has been restored to her family estate. Took 25 years, but we finally closed that circle." I smiled, not because it was poetic justice, but because it meant healing comes in patterns. Sometimes it takes generations to set things right. As for Lily, there's been silence. Occasionally, I'll get a forwarded message through Ava, usually short. "Tell him Emma started piano," or "Mom says she misses you." I don't know if those are olive branches or guilt management tactics, and honestly, I don't care. Some relationships are like houses built on floodplains. You can rebuild them 100 times, but the ground will never hold. One afternoon, while watching street performers near the Ponte Vecchio, I saw a father lift his daughter onto his shoulders so she could see the musicians better. She laughed, tugging his hair, and he laughed with her, full and unguarded. For a moment, I envied them, but only a little, because I finally understood. I can love the memory of fatherhood without needing the fantasy of being loved back. That night, I stood on the balcony again. The city glowed under a soft drizzle, the lights reflecting on wet stone like 100 small apologies I no longer needed. I thought about how easy it is to lose yourself while trying to earn someone's affection, and how beautiful it feels when you finally stop trying. In the distance, church bells chimed the hour. I raised my glass to the sound, not to celebrate, but to acknowledge, to mark the exact moment I stopped carrying the weight of other people's expectations. I used to think revenge was about making others feel the pain they caused, but I see now, it's about reclaiming your peace and refusing to let bitterness define the rest of your story. The truth is, some endings aren't loud. They don't explode. They just dissolve quietly, like frost melting under morning light. And when they do, what's left behind isn't emptiness, it's room. Room to breathe. Room to live. Room to begin again. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been where I was waiting, forgiving too much, confusing guilt for love, let me tell you something I wish I'd known sooner. You can't make people respect you by giving them everything. You teach them how to love you by showing them what you'll no longer accept. And once you do, the world doesn't shrink, it expands. It's been 6 months since I left the United States. 6 months since I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. The longer I stayed away, the more I realized how much of my life had been lived in reaction, reacting to guilt, to need, to disappointment. Florence gave me something America never did: stillness, the kind that doesn't demand an explanation. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of church bells and the smell of roasted coffee from the cafe below my apartment. I walk to the market, buy whatever looks fresh, and speak broken Italian that makes the vendors laugh. There's peace in being foreign. No one knows who you were, so you're free to decide who you are. But peace has a strange habit of drawing out unfinished words. Maybe that's why I started writing the letter. Not to send it, but to finally release everything I never said when it still might have mattered. It began simply, "Dear Lily, I don't hate you." I stared at those 4 words for a long time. Then I kept going. I used to think love meant always showing up, no matter how many times I was left standing alone. I thought patience was proof of loyalty, but patience without respect is just quiet suffering. And I lived most of my life mistaking one for the other. You broke my heart, not because you stopped loving me, but because you stopped remembering who I was. I wasn't just your father. I was the man who built the foundation under your entire life. The house you live in, the opportunities you take for granted, they were made with my hands, with years I can't get back. I didn't want gratitude. I just wanted presence. But here's what I learned since that night. Forgiveness doesn't always need reconciliation. Sometimes it's just deciding not to carry the poison anymore. And I'm done carrying it, Lily. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I do. When I finished writing that paragraph, my hands were shaking. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like surgery, removing something that had been rotting inside me for years. I kept writing. I don't expect you to understand what it took for me to walk away. People like you, people who live off other people's giving, always call boundaries selfishness. But they're not. They're survival. You don't need to say sorry. You just need to stop pretending that love can exist without respect. Emma will know who I was. One day she'll see the truth written in how I protected her future. Maybe she'll think of me not as the man who left, but as the one who refused to disappear quietly. By the time I finished, the pages were damp from the sweat on my hands. I folded them carefully, placed them in an envelope, and wrote her name on the front. Then, I just sat there. I didn't seal it, didn't address it, didn't mail it. Some words aren't meant to be delivered, they're meant to be spoken once, to yourself, and then left behind, like ashes. Later that night, I took the letter to the Arno River. The water was calm, reflecting the yellow city lights like liquid gold. I stood on the bridge, holding the envelope over the edge, and for a moment, I thought about what Margaret would say if she could see me now. Probably something like, "You finally learned that love isn't measured by sacrifice." And maybe she'd be right. I let the letter go. The wind caught it, sent it fluttering into the river, where it floated for a moment before disappearing downstream. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The release wasn't loud, it was quiet, deliberate, complete. The next morning, I booked a train to Rome. From there, maybe I'd go south to Sicily, or maybe to Spain. I hadn't decided yet. That's the thing about freedom. It doesn't demand a destination. It just asks that you move. Before leaving, I wrote one last note, short, direct, and folded into the same leather folder that now held my new will and the trust for Emma. If this is the last word I leave behind, let it be this. I did not die waiting. I lived finally knowing the difference between love and dependency, generosity and guilt, and that made all the years before worth surviving. I locked the folder in the small safe under my desk, took one last look at the little apartment that had become my sanctuary, and smiled. The air was bright with promise. For the first time in decades, my life wasn't about what I'd lost, it was about what I'd reclaimed. The sound of the train that night was steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat I hadn't heard in years. I leaned against the window, watching the lights of Florence fade behind me, and felt something I hadn't felt since I was young. Weightless. Maybe that's what redemption really is, not a grand ending, not revenge or reconciliation. Just the quiet, steady return to yourself after everyone else has stopped recognizing you. And as the train curved along the dark hills of Tuscany, I whispered a truth that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Peace isn't found in being loved back. It's found in learning how to love yourself without needing permission. It's been almost a year now. A year since the airport, the unanswered calls, the cold house that used to feel like home. I sometimes wonder what Lily tells people when they ask about me. Maybe she says I moved away for a change of scenery. Maybe she avoids the topic altogether. Either way, I've stopped trying to edit the version of me that exists in someone else's story. The truth is, I don't think about her much anymore. Not out of bitterness, but because peace doesn't have room for obsession. The silence that used to sting now feels like shelter. I live in Seville these days, in a small apartment above a narrow street that smells of orange blossoms and tobacco. The mornings are slow. I wake up to the sound of church bells and mopeds, make coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and sit by the window to watch the city breathe. Sometimes I talk to the old woman downstairs, Maria, who insists on bringing me fresh bread and gossip about everyone on the block. I think she adopted me without asking. I didn't mind. I've built a rhythm here that's simple but solid. I write for a few hours a day, not for money or recognition, but because it keeps me honest. Most of what I write never leaves the notebook, it's just reflections, pieces of thought I want to keep from floating away. The other day, I wrote this line. Some people break you to see if you'll still keep giving. It stopped me cold, because that was me for so long, bleeding generosity into people who'd long stopped deserving it. Ava still checks in occasionally. She's become less of a lawyer and more of a friend, though she'd probably deny that. A few weeks ago, she sent me a message that read, Emma's trust continues to grow. She's playing piano now, and her teacher says she has real talent. Emma's trust, that one sentence made my whole day. I realized then that the best parts of love are the ones that keep living without you. Every now and then, I still get an email from Lily, short, cautious things. Hope you're well. Or, Emma misses you. She never says sorry, not directly. Maybe she doesn't know how. Or maybe she's still the same person, too proud to admit that what she called independence was just entitlement wearing lipstick. Either way, I no longer wait for her to change. The man who once sat 13 hours at an airport waiting for love that never arrived learned to stop boarding flights that only go in circles. If I've learned anything, it's this. Closure isn't an event, it's a discipline. You practice it every day until the absence stops echoing. A few weeks ago, I found a small wooden box at a flea market here in Seville. It reminded me of the jewelry box that once held Margaret's emerald necklace, the same one Lily never got. I bought it anyway, not because of nostalgia, but because I wanted to fill it with new memories. Inside it now are letters I've written to myself, not out of regret, but gratitude. Notes that remind me of the man I've become, one who stopped begging to be understood, one who learned to speak softly and carry boundaries like armor instead of guilt. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my balcony with a glass of sherry and think about the strange symmetry of life, how something as painful as betrayal can lead to something as beautiful as peace, how the people who wound us most deeply often teach us the most sacred lesson of all, to choose ourselves without apology. I think about Margaret often, not with sadness, but with quiet recognition. She used to say, "You can't save people who don't think they're drowning." I used to argue that love was about trying anyway. Now I see she was right. Love is offering your hand once, maybe twice, but knowing when to let go before they pull you under too. And as for revenge, the kind I once fantasized about when I stood outside that glowing house in the snow, I realize now it was never about getting even. It was about getting free. Revenge is loud, freedom is quiet. One burns, the other heals. Last week, I got a postcard in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It said, "Thank you for everything you taught me. I hope I can make you proud someday." It wasn't signed, but I knew it was from Emma. I placed it in the wooden box, closed the lid gently, and smiled. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not the money, not the property, but the ripple of decency that keeps moving long after you stop pushing it. This is what I've come to believe. We don't lose people when we walk away. We lose illusions. We shed the noise, and beneath it all, what remains is truth, the kind that doesn't need validation, only acceptance. So here I am, a year later, living a smaller life but one that finally fits. No more explaining myself, no more waiting rooms, no more begging for respect from people allergic to accountability. Sometimes I still catch myself reaching for the phone before remembering there's no one left I need to call. And that realization doesn't hurt, it feels like breathing clean air after years underground. Maybe that's the real ending to all of this. Not justice, not punishment. Just stillness. The kind that comes when you've run out of things to prove. And when I sit here at dusk, watching the sky shift from gold to violet, I whisper something to myself that feels both like a benediction and a vow. Peace doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means finally knowing it doesn't control you anymore. If there's one truth that hit me harder than anything this past year, it's this. Protecting your peace is not selfish, it's survival. I spent decades believing that love meant endless forgiveness, that patience was a form of loyalty, and that silence kept the family together. But silence doesn't heal. It hides the wound until it festers. The biggest lesson I've learned is that no is a complete sentence. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing boundaries over burnout, or clarity over chaos. Walking away didn't make me heartless, it made me whole. I stopped confusing guilt for love, obligation for connection, and somewhere between the quiet mornings in Florence and the sleepless nights replaying every word, I realized something freeing. You can grieve people and still be proud of yourself for letting them go. Because peace doesn't come from fixing others, it comes from finally deciding you're worth fixing for yourself. If you're listening to this and you've ever found yourself walking on eggshells around someone who calls it love, take this as your permission to stop, to choose distance over damage, to remember that being a good person doesn't mean being a perpetual victim. So tell me AITA for finally saying enough? Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member or someone who used guilt as currency? What did reclaiming your peace look like for you? Share your stories below. I'd love to hear how you found your way back to yourself.